it's great to see the new faces on this second call. As I said the first time we all met, I'm really privileged and honored to have this meeting. Swiss Re came to me and asked if they could have access to, our agents. They thought that Total Financial, with our presence in the industry, was a good group to be able to grab a bunch of agents and really get some feedback about the processes that Swiss Re is really involved with in creating and working through with our carriers on a day-to-day basis of what we're doing. But they really want to hear how it's working from you rather than getting it from the insurance companies. So today's topic is accelerated underwriting. You all should know, if you're on this call, that it's one of my favorite topics. It's been going on for years. Principal is one of the companies that first started it years ago, and every company looked at them and said, "You are absolutely crazy. This will never work." And now every single company is on board and doing some sort of accelerated underwriting. And it got accelerated even more when we had the pandemic, and every company was really forced to go into the accelerated market because nobody could be examined, wanted to be examined. Therefore, accelerated underwriting, and what I want to do is make this very clear, which actually means a fluidless or non-medical underwriting solution to get a policy. So we're not talking about submission process like we did before, the electronic submission process. This is strictly about what qualifies your client for an accelerated process. And we want to talk about how the company's created it, what they're using to make decisions, how you feel about it, and what's to look forward to in the future. So with that being said, I would like to introduce my other co-speakers, Ben Auden, who is Underwriting Solutions Development for Swiss Re. Notice the Underwriting Solutions Development word. And then we have my dear friend and longtime person that I've known in the industry, Nicole Myers, who is the SVP of Underwriting Propositions, Proposals. So she puts together a lot of these platforms as well. So you have two biggest people I know that are putting these concepts together. So with that being said, Ben or Nicole, why don't you take it away and let's get it going.
Yeah, it sounds good. I'm having a little bit of internet trouble, so please somebody wave at me if you struggle to hear me or if I'm breaking up. I will level set very, very quickly. I'll tell you kind of about who I am, who Swiss Re is very briefly, and then I will hand it over to Ben, and he's going to talk to you in some detail on this so that we can have a really robust conversation around accelerated underwriting. So thank you for the warm introduction, Diana. The team that I lead here is very focused on underwriting innovation, and we see a lot of the forward momentum in this accelerated space in terms of innovation and what it can bring to the table through accelerated underwriting. Swiss Re is well positioned to do this work because we are a thought leader for our carriers, for our direct carriers. We support them, we take the risk with them, and we are the #1 life and health reinsurer in the world, and we're very proud of that. So quite a bit invested in at stake here, and a team that is living and breathing this all the time. If you were with us in the session previously, you may have heard me say, we want to create innovation that sells, because it's not enough for us to just say we've done something innovative. We actually need to be able to be producing products that support distribution, that support the way that we sell and work with our customers, because otherwise it's going to sit on a shelf, and that's not what we want. So it's so important for us to have these conversations with you, because you guys are going to live and breathe these things that are created every single day. For sure, the expectation today, we want to have a very open dialogue. Ben's going to level set with some information, and then we look forward to a passionate exchange of ideas. We'll answer whatever questions we can for you, and steer the conversation appropriately. We do want to hear your perspective. We do ask, if you have a quick question, We're happy to answer a quick question while we're going through the material, but if it's something a little bit more meaty, hold it just a couple of minutes and we'll really be able to dive into it together that way. With that, my esteemed colleague, Mr. Van Otten.
Yeah, no, again, appreciate, Diana, the opportunity to have this conversation. It's always fantastic to have ground on the boots perspective as to what you guys are seeing and how these new programs sort of affect your guys' sales process and what your guys or how you guys are interacting with your clients, right? So to just level set real quick with regards to what accelerated underwriting actually is, and Diana already mentioned this, it really boils down to this idea of a fluidless or non-paramedical journey. But how did we get here? What if we take the 100-foot level? How did we necessarily get here, right? You guys and girls are all well aware that underwriting is a onerous process, right? Like it's not the best way to have designed a product, but we've ended up here with these rich class structures, really competitive pricing. But we do ask a lot of the actual applicants themselves, right? We ask for a part 1 and a part 2 paramedical exam. And so what ended up happening and sort of developing thereafter was a GI and SI products. But the price structure for those particular products just wasn't necessarily what we thought should be applied. There was too much of that. So we then started, and Diana sort of mentioned this with regards to the pivot that Principal had with regards to Accelerated, and we started seeing that to take initiative within the market. Can we get to an SI experience, but still charge those competitive rates and retail pricing for the end applicants, right? And so how do we do that? How do we create the best experience for our customers while at the same time making sure that we're protecting the overall mortality of the carrier's book of business? And so that's sort of the introduction, the sort of impetus and philosophy of how the accelerated products are sort of developed. And so what they truly try to do is to identify those best class risks where we would be able to forego or triage somebody outside of that paramed, those labs. Can we verify that information or segment them into a specific cohort that we can feel confident that they don't necessarily need that information, and information that's presented on the application is, correct and is of little to no risk to the carrier themselves. And so how did these sort of programs become developed? There's quite a few of the larger carriers that are out there that sort of have gone the data science model and developed proprietary models based off of back business. They've looked very specifically at demographic information and created what they call predictive models to then score an individual and allow them to move through this accelerated process. There's other vendors that are out there that are utilizing financial information. So if you think about your credit scores, bankruptcies, liens, and things like that, and all that information feeds into a larger score, a mortality score, where that then sort of triages somebody. And what we've seen from past studies is that those higher or lower scores, the better scores, they actually tend to fit nicely with the mortality curves, the relative mortality curves that we see in the business today. What else is a part of these accelerated underwriting programs? It's exactly what you would typically think of. So your application, your MIB, and your pharmacy database. There are some carriers that are now bringing in some of these newer sources of data. So if you think of the clinical data that's becoming available in the last couple of years, whether it's medical billing codes, you can think of, someone goes to a physician, they report that that person has X impairment, that then gets recorded. It's very different than what MIB is, where that's based off of past life insurance applications. This would be based off of the clinical visits that you're going to be seeing from the applicants themselves. There's also clinical historical labs. This specifically is with regards and related to exam one's lab picture. And we'll talk a little bit about that and how in the future we might begin to see carriers begin to implement some of these things. You probably have already seen it, especially within the pandemic. A lot of our carriers came to us to ask about COVID exceptions, right? There was, because of the pandemic, we weren't able, like Diana said, to be able to get individuals into homes. And so a lot of carriers started to rely on things like lab picture and medical billing to be able to forego that fluid sort of process where we're requiring the paramedic exam. And so again, ultimately what we're trying to do, get individuals, create a much more efficient process, but also one that is better served, a better experience for the clients. Again, something that looks a lot like what clients have come to expect within other markets and other industries, right? No one goes to a mortgage and then has to give blood. There's times where that process is much shorter, but more money, and there's less, and we expect so much more of these individuals. So really and truly, we're trying to sort of meld these two things together, and we'd love to hear your guys' opinion. But real quick, what we want to do is to go through this journey and this roadmap. This kind of serves as a foil maybe for the future discussion that we can kind of have with regards to what Accelerated is today and what it might look like, and then compare it to the traditional journey that we see clients go through on a regular basis today. So day one, your traditional journey, you know what this looks like. You meet with your client. They've decided to apply for an application. They are going to be answering a part one. Maybe there's a drop ticket, but regardless, we'll call day one once part one, part two has necessarily been completed. In an accelerated environment, still the same sort of thing. Once that authorization has been signed, we begin to draw that information from those initial databases. We get the pharmacy, we get the MIB, and we start to look and build a framework and a picture of what the potential risk is. In this case, we have an individual called Virginia. In the accelerated process, we can utilize, and this is maybe a little bit more future thinking. This isn't necessarily the process today, but from a future perspective, is there an opportunity for us to bring in things like medical billing where we can begin to fill in those applications and then have an applicant confirm that they have those conditions? And so that moves us already further along down the disclosure history. It also sort of removes some of the unnecessary or even intrusive sort of conversations that are already existing today. I can remember when I was working for a direct carrier, having to ask about drugs and alcohol sometimes can be a really obtrusive sort of conversation with someone, especially when you know them very well. They might begin to feel uncomfortable about having that conversation. And so this would necessarily get us to a point where we don't necessarily have to have that, and we can facilitate some more of the in-depth conversations that necessarily need to happen so that we can begin to reduce some of the ambiguity that exists, that is there within the application process, and we can move people forward quicker. So day three for the traditional journey, we have an applicant receives the underwriter actually receives the application. It's been kicked out. The pharmacy's record shows medications for thyroid and diabetes. So now the underwriter has to make a decision. How are they going to resolve this thyroid? How are they going to resolve the diabetes? And so they go and they grab the paramedical exam. And we see that doesn't necessarily happen until maybe day 10 in this actual traditional journey, right? However, on an accelerated path, and again, thinking futuristically here, is there a possibility to start to begin to apply some of these new data sources to impaired lives? Can we begin to bring in information from lab picture where we would be able to confirm that person's A1C, their glucose levels, and some of the urinalysis results, where we would be feeling comfortable to make that offer on day 5 instead of waiting for day 10, even after they've performed their paramedical exam, had their labs drawn. This is all going to be sort of done in the background a seamless process that would necessarily allow for an individual to go and receive this policy. So in the traditional journey, we're continuing along. Day 25, we've ordered the APS because we weren't able to resolve some of the additional information. We received the APS and finally offered the client the same exact offer that we did for the accelerated portion. Again, this fluidless environment, much quicker, less intrusive for the client, but very much less expensive for the direct carrier, but also one that is less intrusive and a better customer experience for the end applicant.
I have a question.
Yeah, certainly.
How do you protect the insured from misrepresentation at this point? Virginia didn't disclose her medical condition. You went out you found out, and regardless, you issued the preferred standard, whatever you did, she still have done misrepresentation. How do we protect her that this doesn't go and catch her?
And what we would have liked to have done was to, there's still opportunities to amend and, put that into the application, make sure that that's a part of an addendum or, part of that other section of the actual application, or actually amend the application itself.
So you will amend the application regardless?
So in this scenario, what we were thinking would be that we would pull the billing records and then we would pre-fill those questions so that Virginia, look, at the end of the day, this is really difficult stuff. We're talking about medical impairments. A lot of people don't understand or know what the true terminology is. Nicole, how often do we read somebody's application and we're like, why are you asking them about this really complex, complicated impairment? They don't know what it actually is. They don't know what the implications are. So it becomes really difficult to have that type of conversation. But if we were able to pre-fill that in on an application, they're able to initial it or say, yes, this is, I attest to the fact that you found this information. It makes sense. There's no fear for that misrepresentation, to your point, Isaac, right? Because I think what you're saying is, how can I protect her family? How can I protect Virginia's family for what's going to happen in the future?
Yeah, and particularly if it happened within a 2 years contestability.
Yeah.
That could be devastating. We just want to make sure at least there's an amendment in the application.
Yeah.
That said, sorry, I missed that. We get that all the time. People really don't know every condition they have.
Nicole, I want to rephrase what Isaac just asked, and you can answer it, okay? Because this is much greater than what Isaac just said. There are many times where there's information that's not disclosed by the client, whether it's their medical history or something else that in their minds did not think it was relevant enough to put down because it was resolved, it went away, it happened so long ago, they don't even remember it. And now you guys are pulling up, RX scripts. Oh, this person got a painkiller a year ago. And they forgot to put down that they got this painkiller. And it's like, oh, you're denied because you got a painkiller. So, that goes to, which we haven't even gotten to, these different pathways that the three of us have discussed.
Diana, I need to stop you for a second. It's not that you're denied, is the company finds out that they had taken the painkiller, but issued a policy anyway, but nobody ever signed on that she took a painkiller. In other words, the insurance company said, we're good, we're okay with that. I just don't want to leave room for denial of a claim if it happened in 2 years.
Wouldn't it go through the same claims process, Nicole, you can answer this, that a normal application would be where they would actually do the same investigation and make sure that they got all the information that they had the ability to ask for at that time?
Mm-hmm.
Do we lose Nicole?
I don't want to speak necessarily for our claims department, but typically, and especially when I've done claims previously, we specifically look to see what information was available. Isaac, to your point, those individuals that were found to have a painkiller, and the underwriter didn't follow up on it, that is the insurer's bad. They have to take that risk. They can't rescind that policy knowing that that individual had a painkiller. Similarly, if someone was on a neurologic or a biologic type drug, the insurer bears the burden to follow up on that information. Otherwise, they've accepted everything in the gambit that would necessarily be needed to treat. Does that make sense?
It makes sense,
Okay.
being careful, doing this for 45 years, I had a couple of claims where people died within the 2 years.
Yeah.
They got paid. Every one of them got paid. I mean, we had a lady died. Diana did a great job. That she had breast cancer. 3 days later, after delivery of the policy, she ended up with brain
wow.
cancer. We paid the claim because she never knew that she had brain cancer. But so now it becomes sensitive to make sure the client during the 2 years they are covered.
Yeah.
So, Nicole, did you want to add anything to that, or do you want to go through and finish the rest of the process?
I feel like every time things start to get spicy, my Zoom like cracks up on me. So I did catch the tail end on that. I mean, listen, this is finding the balance between asking enough questions and getting enough information as the carrier during the app, right? And asking too much and creating a really poor customer experience, or asking about black lung or stuff that, we shouldn't be asking about, right? But when it comes to claim time, I think, just to reiterate what Ben had said, the carrier does bear the burden, right? They bear the burden. And what's very interesting is in applications which are taken via call centers, they actually have the call center recording that will come into the claim, and it'll be pulled into the court case if it goes to court, and they can, and over again, essentially, it comes back to, it was the carrier's responsibility to ask what needed to be asked. In those particular calls, the agent didn't take it forward because they weren't prompted by the application. Again, the carrier bears the burden of that. So.
Okay, thank you.
And I haven't necessarily been deposed, fingers crossed, but I've written the sort of summaries for those depositions.
Neither have I.
Sorry, Nicole, you were saying something additional.
It's okay. I know I'm a little, my Zoom is trending a little behind. Okay, so the floor is open.
Okay, before we get to the floor, let's, and I want to make sure everybody knows, we want to try and get as many people's voices on this as possible. So that's why we have this amount of time, so many of you can be heard. So the accelerated process, I want to point out a couple of things for subjects to talk about. The point of this, the companies are spending much less to process the cases, okay? Which is very important, makes it more profitable business for them. The information that they are getting, the data they are getting that's being read by their underwriters is new. And underwriters are needing to be trained as to what that information is that's coming through on that data. There are underwriters that have been in the industry for years and years and years and years. They're not used to reading data, just like you and I are not used to processing and doing this stuff electronically and not fulfilling requirements. So it's a learning process on their end and on the company's ends. We want the process to be efficient. My biggest issue, and your all biggest issue, is that this process is not consistent across the board. And it is broken up and goes different directions across the board. You have carriers that you can submit the case and they get the information and it's accept or reject. You have carriers that get the information, and if there's something kind of that's misleading on the app, they want to clarify it, it will go back to an underwriter. They'll come back and ask you information to clarify it. They'll approve it. There's some companies that will go back and say, no, we want APS information to now look at the case. And then at the end, there's the denial, okay? And which means you have to go through full underwriting. So all of the carriers you work with, for the most part, have different paths that they chose and developed to go down that they thought would be better to get as much information to make a decision. A lot of you have also said that our last conversation was all, look, you own the client. This is your client. They believe in you. They want to talk to you. And this process is pretty much letting go, letting the carriers do all the work, get all the data. They're on the phone with the client. They're pulling up the data. And in 10 minutes, they're telling your client you're approved or denied. And you don't know about it till after your client calls you and says, hi, I was denied. What happened? And then you're like, I don't know. I'll find out. And then sometimes if Total Financial is really good, I can come back and say, this is why they were declined. Or sometimes I'm going to get told, I can't tell you why this is declined because it went through a computer and there's an algorithm and we don't know what it is. So these are things I want to put in your mind before we open up this for conversation, because these are the things that I think that you all should be talking about. And how does that affect your sales? And what are you telling your clients when you're proposing this way? Is this a good thing or is this a bad thing?
Diana, what's the difference between the accelerated underwriting? And I remember during COVID, you got me $7 million without medical exam on a client who's 64-year-old by getting his medical record. What's the difference between what you've done on that case and that $1 million policy that everybody's out there trying to tell you it's accelerated underwriting?
Well, that's a really good question. I want Nicole to take a stab at this, but so each carrier has their own limits, right? It was 500, 1 million, 2 million, 3 million. And then you had these couple of companies that went all the way from 7 million, 10 million or more. And it's not really an accelerated process when it gets to those numbers. That's just a carrier that's willing to say, hey, we're willing to look at APSs instead of getting medical requirements. The accelerated process is really truly only supposed to be, when they first created this and started this, data. It was supposed to be an in and out process. It was supposed to be a 48-hour, 72-day process. And it developed into, no, we might need more information. So
right.
Summary is, you got the company that's the exception. That's not really an accelerated process. That's more of a company saying, we're willing to look at medical records without bothering the client for that amount.
If I might, I sent 5 cases to be accelerated. I'm not comfortable with the accelerated because every one of them either had to take an exam, and they were not young, they were young people. It came back preferred on most of them, but I didn't have the control. I didn't have the medical record. I didn't have the information. So things were happening behind the scene, and still some of them had to be medically examined. So I haven't had the best experience.
CJ, you've done quite a few. What do you think? This is like your wheelhouse.
Who's that, Ben?
CJ.
Okay.
Yeah, our experience, our practice leverage, or we do a lot of business to business placements. So, we have individuals that are getting covered that are not for the benefit of themselves, but for the company, right? And so
right, that's the case.
So their incentive is, none. They don't get any benefit if they're gone, but it's the company. So, we like to have where it's available, them not to be subject to the exam. And so, there's a certain number of carriers that we're comfortable with and doing that. And, we're glad to see some of the limits to get a little bit higher than what it was, $1 million, a couple of years ago. So, Ben, I have just a couple of questions. We've found it a little harder on the process itself when there's multiple signatures and there's, you know, a business data point involved.
That's what I was going to ask you, that
Yeah.
you're doing B2B and you're doing Accelerated. I was super impressed that you're getting all these people through. No, but I think that relationship with a carrier, it becomes a little bit more onerous, right? Just thinking about my time working specifically in these cases, like you said, especially when you start thinking about some of the more complex business preservation type things, you know, certainly when I'm thinking about what is going to necessarily kick these people out, and you're going to have to find, and what I would necessarily suggest, CJ, is to find a carrier where you're going to have an instance where someone gets kicked out of the accelerated process, but they still retain them, as Diana was sort of mentioning, in this fluidless process. So again, you're not putting them through this larger sort of expectation. Are there opportunities with carriers where, yeah, I can still clarify a couple extra pieces with regards to the business net worth or the business valuation, or even maybe sort of the structure and the business partners themselves? Maybe it's 3 business partners and there's different equity within each of them, and they need to verify how or why they have the differentiation of equity. You know, those types of things can be sort of resolved between you and the direct carrier versus what you don't want to have happen, right? And I assume this is what you're sort of asking, is to, because of this complex contract structure, you're forcing somebody to a paramed exam. That's what you don't want to necessarily have happen. You really want to keep them within that because they otherwise qualify for it. It just happens to be a business structured contract.
Don't you think that's where it's going to end up going though, Ben? I mean, right now, when they started it, obviously everybody came out with an individual, you know, ownership, you know, we can't do trust, you can't do, you know, another person. And
Yeah.
it's kind of been evolving really quickly. So don't you think that is in the near future?
I've even seen it with, and maybe this is to Isaac's point with regards to his younger age individuals. You know, I've even seen carriers really begin to start to develop really complex structures around younger individuals because they're being kicked out because of credit, right? So you might end up with a 25-year-old or a 30-year-old who hasn't necessarily had an opportunity to build a credit score. So they have this really low credit score. They're going to end up getting kicked out. But it's not because they're of a poorer risk. It just ends up happening because the fact that they haven't owned a home. I mean, think about the way that our society has continued to sort of flux these younger individuals into the later years of their life still aren't owning homes until they're maybe 35, 40 years old. You know, they're still sort of transient. I mean, that's one of the biggest things, the credit score. If you moved, maybe you got a job right out of college, then had to move to sort of build your career up and up and up and moved up the ladder, you're going to be penalized for it because you've moved to 3 different jobs. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're more risky. It's just sort of the antiquated sort of idea of what the credit score originally was. But again, having that opportunity, understanding what are the actual elements that exist within the carrier that you've applied with, what are the individual elements that make up their accelerated process, and then being able to speak to and explain what that is to try and get them back into that fluidless process. I think it's, to me, like that's where I would want to sort of position myself so that I can create the best experience for my clients.
So each company has their own guidelines that they print out that say what is acceptable for accelerated underwriting and what isn't for acceptable underwriting. This financial issue that you just brought up is really interesting to me because there are so many people like young, that you said, like young people who might not have the income. And then you have cases, Eric had a case, whether he remembers this or not, I do, where he had a client who had a very large open amount of credit on their credit rating. And the company denied that person because they had a big
His income to debt
line of
ratio is
credit.
too large.
And this person had a line of credit because, oh, they bought a lot of real estate. So they actually needed a lot of line of credit opened. And that was kicked out and denied. And I actually had to go back to the underwriter and say, no, you can't kick this person out. This person has, you know, more than enough money. They need this. But I had to explain that to the underwriter and get that exception to go back in. Isn't there some sort of guidelines we can help create with the carriers?
Well,
or
so
financials?
maybe it's really good to sort of take a step back, right? And understand who ends up underwriting a lot of these cases. You know, these aren't meant to necessarily be the really complex cases that senior underwriters and consultants are necessarily working on. I think this is a really interesting case. And Eric, if you have any more additional sort of information, it'd be interesting to hear your opinion
To a
as well.
small amount too. It wasn't.
Oh, it
even
was a
a
small
large
amount?
It wasn't even a large amount.
No, yeah, it was like $1 million a term on someone who was worth like 30 million. So
Yeah.
it was
Right.
just an extra policy and he got declined.
Yeah.
But
So,
I think
yeah,
this sort
it
of
was
just
not
speaks to the,
complicated.
I think it just speaks to the junior and, you know, underwriters that are necessarily handling these cases, because a senior underwriter or underwriting consultant would have taken a look at that case, understand what he was necessarily doing. He's, you know, using his credit
That's
to
what
leverage
happened.
based off the equity that he's necessarily purchased in the homes. It makes total sense to you know, to be doing this and then be, you know, God forbid he's got all this money now. He needs to have life insurance and at least another $1 million. No, but I guess what I wanted to necessarily say is, I guess we have to be patient on both sides. And well, I don't necessarily mean it's not, we have to, Diana said this at the very outset, communication is key. Being able to explain these situations, being able to speak to why someone is requiring this additional coverage and why they're necessarily being kicked out. You know, and again, these aren't your typical senior underwriters or consultants that are necessarily handling some of these kick out cases. But there's opportunities maybe to sort of have these more in-depth conversations to bring them back into the fold and make sure they get placed.
Well, these are the people that have to be trained. And that's what I brought up to begin
Yeah.
with. Every single carrier right now is training and hiring underwriters like crazy because they're so geared up to do this accelerated process. They don't even have underwriters that understand how to interpret this information. And exactly what you said on Eric's case, I had to bring it to the senior underwriter and say, look at this, and he had to approve it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point, right? There was supposed to, in the early days, it was like, we're going to make this easy and seamless. And actually what we, you know, you really had to bring the change management to it and try to bring the underwriters to it as well. And so that
You froze.
the tension,
Yeah.
thought that, you know, we could take younger underwriters on these cases, and then it just hasn't played out the way, you know, that we've thought. So there's a lot of human work that's kind of shifting around this accelerated to make sure that things make sense. You know, it used to just be, does it make sense when in terms of underwriting, right? You look at the whole case, you have the holistic picture, you understand what, you know, in this case, the line of credit versus the person's occupation versus where this sits. And as an underwriter, you'd form this whole picture and make a decision. And the accelerated has tried to smooth out a lot of those pieces. And the edge cases are what we're talking about here, right? That really is where we need to get better.
So let's go into sales.
My Zoom is
I'm going to
frozen.
pick on Lindsay for a second.
Oh my gosh.
I want
I
to
just
know,
jumped in,
how do you
Diana.
sell this to your clients? How do you say to your clients, what do you tell them when you say you can qualify or may qualify for a policy without any medical exam?
So I really only do that, and that's based on the negative experience I've had with it. So I really only do it with the small cases that I just don't want to spend the time on, because I believe they should be easy. So most of the time, even if it's let's say a small case, but it's an important client, I have to do it myself, because it's the only way that I'm comfortable that the step-by-step will occur the way that I'm saying it's going to occur. But as you know, I get referred cases. I don't know the client. They're from a PNC firm. They're small cases. And my hope is that they go smoothly and quickly, because it's obviously time consuming to do it the way that I do it. So when I sell it, I just, when it's the case that it's a small case, I'm not worried that, worst case, it bounces back, it becomes a headache. I really don't know the client, and the PNC firm knows that this is kind of erratic at times and that it doesn't always go as smoothly as we'd hope. So the way that my conversation is that what we're going to try to do, we're going to go through, I'm going to complete an online application, and at that time, there's several different ways, but either the underwriter calls or, now with John Hancock, they'll send it directly to the clients. I've done it both ways where they'll complete it themselves. And, once they complete the phone interview, there's a 50-50 chance that a medical exam will be required. And we don't know, they kind of, it's literally like a lottery. So if they require one, it is what sorry, but
No, you don't have to apologize, right?
No, that's
Like,
exactly what you needed to hear, is what she just said.
no, and I talked to one of the guys that's on our team, and this is what he's always bringing up, Lindsay. And I think it speaks very specifically to what you're saying, is that a lot of people don't want to apply for Accelerated because they don't know what the actual experience is going to necessarily be. They can't prep their client for the unknown. And so, it's this idea that they're not sure what's going to end up happening. And so they don't necessarily apply for the Accelerated. I guess, does everyone feel in that same sort of path that you'd rather not use Accelerated because of the unknown?
I think
right.
it's
And again,
Yeah.
I'm sure not many people can say the same thing, where I don't know the client. It's not coming directly from a referral source of someone I've done business with who knows. So I always use them as like my guinea pig. And if it doesn't go well, like, sorry.
Yeah.
But I just don't do it for my close clients, even sometimes on smaller cases. But, the referrals we get, we've been from my mother being in business to me, I've been in now business 20 years, which is just crazy. So, and now with my mother, that's probably another, total of 40 years. So we have our clients' grandchildren calling us for insurance.
Right.
And we just want to always do it right and kind of, deliver it with a bow, and the process go as seamless as it can. And it really can only be that way when we get involved, when we handle it, Diana even knows, like, sometimes I'm like, sorry, Diana, I'm not letting you order these medical records, or it's the company you use, I'm doing it myself, because it's just the only way to really control it. So, but the process has worked. It's sometimes, and we look like a hero when it does. It certainly makes us look good, but there's been many times where it's made us look bad. So.
Diana,
Go ahead.
I think that, and I'm just punting, anybody on this call could be legacy Marty, inherited Diana, and used to a very personal touch of underwriting. AI is sort of a scary thing. And what Lindsay just said is, in anybody's mind, to turn it over to the abyss versus the experience that we've all had with your firm is almost it's not possible. Now, if I attach AI to a PEO enrollment process and I have a bunch of 30-year-olds that I'm never going to do anything other than a quick app, it makes all the sense in the world with the disclaimer, hey, the world has changed. You may qualify, we may need to intervene, but this is the process. Because this is great for a +1 underwriting machine, but a one-off in a million years, who in their right mind is using anything other than Kimberly or you or David or what anybody on this call is accustomed to with the total personal touch?
Bruce, I agree with you.
Yay.
100%. And I think it's a great tool during COVID. During COVID, when the client doesn't want to see anybody, it's certainly, it's a way to go around sending a doctor, a physician or a nurse to do an exam. But until it's perfected, I'm really having a difficult time with it. It hasn't been, we got some cases approved, but it's not the way I would like it.
Can
I-
you,
Can
can
I
you
add something?
elaborate on a word you just used for me? You said until it's perfected, you wouldn't be comfortable. I would love for everybody in this group to actually, what does that look like? What does
Okay.
perfected look like?
Until the insurance company able to get, like they're doing some of the work they're doing, the driver license electronically, the medical record electronically, and just be able to be flexible of some of the medical information, not to get it, then ask for a medical exam. If they can lower the threshold for a medical exam, so we don't go back to the client, ask them to do a medical exam where I don't have a copy of the information. I haven't received, by the way, once, copy of the medical information that was taken from my clients, and that's imperfection. You know,
The
now I'm
carriers,
going
they
to-
can't disclose it.
I'm sorry.
The carriers legally aren't allowed to disclose it.
Well, then now I'm in, like Bruce said, an abyss, you know.
Yeah,
I don't-
no, 100%. I wholeheartedly
So
agree. I
just,
think,
you know, so we can finish with the thought. Until if you know, and if the client give me permission to look at it, I wouldn't mind get him to sign on a form. I just don't want the client to be asking why, and I don't have the why, and I can't get the information.
I have a great idea.
There's a couple, go ahead, Bruce.
How about the environment is, hey, client, there's another path that some people like. You need to sign off on this. They may pull an RX pull on you. They may pull a Milliman. They may use AI in the background to confirm the probability of where you'll land, because to misstep with an important case certainly is something that's unacceptable. But to have upfront vision that is non-invasive to the client and nothing more than you have my authorization, because they'll point and click on a computer, even if they're semi-comatose. I mean, it's not invasive. A lot of clients have difficulty with technology. We did a couple of online cases, and I did one, and it was a nightmare. Why? Because my standard operating procedure is, hey, James, set this up. And I look at it and sign, and I'm done. And clients sort of like that. But hey, you need to learn this whole new language called use your computer when you have a hard time turning on a computer, may not really go over so well, because now we're no longer talking about insurance. We're talking about a technology deficit that they're not willing to deal with.
Oh, Ernie, you could talk about technology deficits. Why don't you hit on that?
Well, yeah, I'm only now starting to get to use comfortably the computer in that fashion. I'm so used to filling out an application. It was a lot for me during COVID to scan and send an application to a client, have them return the signed pages, and then I complete it. I usually talk to people I've known for years, as opposed to anybody relatively new, unless they're referred to me. So just this morning, I completed a John Hancock application through the iGo. Is that what it's called? Okay, I just did it this morning. I had Peter help me a little bit. It was the first time, but it's done. The client is 67. He knows he has to be examined because it's $1 million application, so he'll be examined. But I didn't have to send him any paperwork, so I kind of like that, and he liked that. But he's very sophisticated. He's not as unsophisticated as I am. I know what to do. I know how to use it, but I still like filling out an application. I've done it the way my father did it. I learned from my dad. He taught me when I started 47 years ago. So this is new. Sure, there are a lot of people that would prefer not to get examined, and I've done that a number of times, but the majority of them have kicked back, even young people, where the company has asked for an exam. So I've had to deal with that. And like I said, fortunately, most of these people are people I know or have been referred to me by people I know.
Ernie, I don't mean to derail us, but I cut my teeth at a company that actually had weekly policies still.
Oh, that's what my dad did. That's what my dad
Yeah,
did.
right.
Which company was that, Ben? What's the name of it?
Western Southern in Cincinnati.
Oh,
Center, okay. Eric, can you shed light on this? You're the youngest, one of the young people here that may be doing it online. We lost Eric.
Yeah,
He
we're
doesn't do
doing-
it online. He has, I'm sorry, did I say that out loud? Shit.
Well, okay, you know, my son Mateo has done a lot of business online. He doesn't, you know, and I used to be jealous of how he does it. So I thought maybe Eric and Mateo being the same age is doing a lot of it online too.
You know who's doing a lot of it online? Ken
CJ.
Mayer's doing a lot of it
Yeah,
online.
CJ and Ken, both of them.
I would love for Ken to be able to talk about, because he hits it all the time. And he's got a lot of experience on this. And I'd love for him to say whether it's good or bad, if he can unmute himself.
can I add one more thing? If I may, Bruce's comment about the personal touch, Marty, and now Diana. Diana learned from Marty, so that's what she does. And it would be criminal if she's taken out of the process of getting preferred best instead of preferred, or preferred instead of standard. It also, I think, works a lot faster if there's a case that warrants her attention that she's involved in, rather than waiting until the whole process is done, and then she has to make a call to one of her favorite underwriters to get ahead of it or come back to it. That's why I like talking to her so much,
Thank you.
telling her about the cases and getting it done as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
To jump in real quick, Diana, the couple people were talking about having the exams being done and not, oh, and Isaac, as you mentioned, getting an exam done and not having access to it. What we do is I tell the clients, if they want you to take an exam, let me know, we'll handle it. So then we order the exam ourselves through our normal preferred vendors. And then we have it, we send it to Total, and then they can just shop the case.
That's what I do.
And then also send it to the company that needed it as well. Or, you know, decide if we want to do that, because then it becomes formal. That's my biggest issue with it, is that they're formal.
Yeah,
didn't
Eric,
even
if
know
you're
you would
talking
do
about- yeah, we do the exam ourselves too,
Mhm.
not personally, but
Amy, I'll explain that after.
Depends on the
But
client.
I'm talking
But-
about when we do not do an exam and the client is, the home office calling him, like Prudential will
Mhm.
call from the home office and get the medical information, and I have no access to it.
What's asked on the questionnaire. Let's let Ken answer this, because he really does do a lot of this and he's had some really interesting experiences.
Yeah, sure, Diane. I enjoy the VAR system is very good, but I'm in New York, so New York still a lot of carriers you can still always submit paper, which is frustrating. So for me, if I could submit everything like that, it would be great. But unfortunately, that's not the case right now in New York.
And on average, when you have done it, have you had cases that have actually worked and gone through quickly?
Yes, I find the system, you know, if it goes smooth, the case will go quickly. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So moving forward, if the industry decides tomorrow or next year, hey, we're just going to be doing this in general, like all of our cases, you know, you're going to come in electronically and they're going to try and put you through an AU program first on their end and say, we either have all this information up front, enough to make a decision, or we're going to come back and then ask you for additional requirements and or an exam. Are you going to be okay with that moving forward, or would you rather go back to ordering exams and taking the full control?
Well,
What do you see in the future?
that wouldn't work, because how are you going to shop it with multiple carriers at one time? You go to one and you get a standard, then you have to tell the client to do another phone call to go to another carrier to get a table 2. Then you go and it's it's going formal every time. Then you go somewhere else. I mean, so many times, like one of our last cases, client spending $250,000, you were able to find a preferred out of all the other 8 standards. How would we do that if you weren't able to see what all the offers were, then push the one that made the most sense?
So hypothetically, you'd be submitting to a carrier, right? And that carrier, let's says, we're going to put you through, and you don't go through. That carrier has to be able to release all information to us, whether it's APS information or any medical information that they got, so that we can have it to shop with other carriers. That would
Yes.
be the best case scenario. And that is one of the roadblocks, Nicole, because not every carrier allows you to get copies of any of the information that they're getting.
But so, and Eric's point's also really interesting because, and I saw this at other carrier, at previous carrier, this idea that you go through Accelerated, you get kicked out, you're now a formal application. It is what it is. You're going to be MIB coded. It's going to go through the normal formal process. Eric now has to go and ask for that case to be withdrawn so that he can go do 3 other informals with other applicants. And so you really, I mean, I guess I'm kind of speaking against Accelerated at this point, but
You are.
For those applicants, you're putting them in a situation to some extent. And again, it goes back to this idea of ambiguity, right? Of the process in and of itself. We're not sure what's going to necessarily happen to these individuals and what's going to be the outcome. And so you've put somebody into a process where you no longer have Eric's opportunity to go and do some of the informal applications with additional carriers.
I'm going to opt out here. Thank you very much, Diane. I have to drive to LA and I want to miss some of the traffic.
You're gonna come see me?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I'll
let's
give you
fight.
a call.
Sorry, I got him. No, bye. Thank you,
Bye,
Isaac.
Isaac.
Thank you, Isaac.
Take care, Isaac.
So is there any
No,
way
I'm
in
done
the
here.
future that you could maybe, or like we have now, you know, we have requirements for agent amount, right? That's what we're all used to and have been using for forever. It would seem to me that moving forward, since there's so many companies that just jumped into this process, right? And it varies. It would seem that we should be able to come up with something that we can present and have to our agents and our clients know this is what they are going to be getting. This, and this. So can you give me the information so that the agents can have a field underwriting conversation with their client about these things up front?
I mean, we could put something together, but again, it's going to be different for each of the carriers because they have their own potential program. They've each set cut points at certain specific areas. I mean, again, it's going to be and boil down to very specific things. And this is what I would necessarily be doing from a field underwriting standpoint. I'd be asking about, do you have any liens, any known bankruptcies? You know, Eric, that case that you had, any new recent lines of credit that you've necessarily applied for that would otherwise cause for your credit score to necessarily go down. And then it's your typical sort of pieces of understanding with regards to their medical history. And I know these are difficult conversations and not everyone wants to necessarily share everything about what, you know, their personal medical history. But I mean, it really is relevant. And it could just be as easy to say, are you comfortable sharing everything? And if not, let's go through the full underwriting process so that I know exactly what I can set you up for. But if you want to fully disclose what you want to necessarily say, let's run through this list of things. And that kind of gets us to a better understanding of who's going to pass through these accelerated programs. Sorry, Nicole, go ahead.
I'm going to jump in here a little bit, and I do recognize that we are past time as well. But the conversation is fantastic and rich. You know, Diana, I actually think that what we're talking about right here, there is some immediate resolution in terms of communication, but I think it's actually an area for innovation, right? We think a lot at Swiss Re, obviously, about where do we innovate for underwriters and for carriers, but just leaves me with a feeling that there's a real area of opportunity to develop something that's specific for this type of world, right? Using data. And what does it look like to potentially have access to, you know, something lighter that might be an indicator, that might be directional. So I think, you know, I think you've got my wheels spinning, right? And that's great because there's something that can be done here. We have all of this data we're sitting on. Let's put it to use. Hey, Mark.
You know, I'm going to, after my 60 some odd years in the business, I don't see any problem with small cases that may or may not matter that much. But Marty had me do something many years ago. This is when Diana was tiny.
Tiny.
Tiny. At any rate, whenever I did a large app, Marty said, well, why not give us the total survey form?
The HIPAA.
Then I had the medical not sent to the insurance company, but sent to total. Absolute total control. The other thing that we needed control over is the fact that in the wealthier communities, many times, unfortunately, physicians write things on the chart in quotes to help their patient get insurance companies to pay. Another problem. In addition to that, now I wouldn't involve myself in this, but I can think, especially bearing in mind the NBA player scandal with health insurance, I can think of one hell of a scandal with this kind of underwriting on large cases. I don't know if you want me to go through it, but no, I don't. Okay, but I can think of one, that that could be very expensive to the carriers. And when something is expensive to the carriers, who does it trickle down to? It trickles down to us and the client. The same thing with with inflation and the higher prices. The companies aren't going to eat it. It trickles down to us. Same thing with insurance. So the bottom line is when you have the larger cases, and you can have no definition of a larger case, but the larger cases you want control.
That he left his literally the weed whacker sitting right in front of the clubhouse.
Lindsay, you're on mute.
Oh shoot, sorry.
Nicole, I think the big solve here is if the offers can just be a tentative offer and not formal, because then you feel like you have control because you went through the process. If you don't like it, then you didn't lose anything by doing it. I don't see the insurance carriers giving the information because you went through the process. It was an expense to the carrier for them just to give it to you, say, okay, go shop it somewhere else. So I think it'd have to be some sort of third-party financial call center that they're talking to for some sort of agreement with the reinsurers or however it works out. But I think if it's not formal, we can get the information, or if there's some sort of like Diana, like your Vibe program or something where it can be one group of carriers where you can then be sent at the same time, then that would be extremely helpful, because then you feel like you're shopping it, but you're doing it through AUP.
That's a great point, because I got to say, that was something, Scott, you might remember this when it came out. When we came out with Vive, that was one of the things that we talked about was you should be able to do a widespread submit to all of those carriers at once and see what those carriers would all do. And the problem is all those carriers end up saying, well, we don't want to look at this if it's been looked at by another carrier, or if you've, applied for insurance in the last year. But to Eric's point, it certainly would be great if you could have multiple submissions at once with just a generic app. That would be great to see if you could get approved through the process with multiple carriers.
I think it's just a question of when you get to one death benefit and up, or one premium and up, how much control you want to retain and how much control you want to give to the insurance carrier. There is a point where you're going to want to retain control, and I'll credit Marty with that too, because that was Marty's standard operating procedure. A survey form with the application, medical goes to total financial. He had absolute control. We as agents had absolute control. There was no guessing game. And then if we also have the opportunity of questioning the client if we feel the doctor may have been putting things on his chart to help them get the insurance company to pay, we could start to question that. And then we have to get the doctor to write some kind of offsetting comment on the chart and get it to the client.
Yeah, these AUPs are like $1 or $2 million, so that they're not huge cases.
So are you okay with are you okay with 3 million and under? Are you okay with 1 million? What's your magic number of cases that you really are comfortable putting through this?
It depends on the client. If you have
In
a close
general.
relationship with the client, you want to keep absolute control. If it's a quasi stranger, it may not be as important. And then it's also as how important and each of those amounts vary by agent. Isaac puts in huge cases, so his number may be higher than somebody else's.
All right, so we're 10 minutes over our allotted time, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. These are some amazing comments. What basically, if I want to sum it up, it sounds like the bulk of everyone is like the last conversation that we had is, listen, we work hard to get our clients. These people matter a lot to us. We still want to maintain control. How can we work within this accelerated underwriting process? Where are the places that it can get better, where we can still maintain control and have our clients have, you know, the smaller face amounts and so forth, still maintain control, but have them go through this process.
And have your BGA bill your advocate still. Evidently, that's important to everybody.
Definitely.
Sounds that way, yes. So I mean, at the end of the day, that's what I feel like I heard.
You want to feel like it's the same process, but you just accelerate it and not that it's a hindrance by doing it.
Right. That's actually a very good way to put it that way. So first and foremost, I and Diana and the whole team, we love the conversation, by the way. This is exactly, I think, when Diana and I talked about it, at least what we wanted to hear. We wanted to hear our close friends and our agents talk about what's working, what's not, and what we can do better. So huge thank you to that. We have another one coming. The next one, I think, is in 2 weeks, and it's on e-health records.
It's Nicole's favorite topic.
My
It's
favorite
Nicole's
topic.
favorite topic. Nice. And I think it's a really hot topic now. Even it's very even more unique than this topic, because I think there's so many places that we can play from there.
Yeah.
So we'll make sure we get reminders out to everyone. So I can turn it over to the Swiss Re team and Diana, and they can close it out.
Well, thank you, everybody. Really, really happy about the participation here. I'm really, I couldn't ask for more. This is exactly what I was asked to do by these people from Swiss Re. So I think they got some really great feedback. Like Scott said, the next one is going to be on the electronic health record process. So that's here, that's happening, no matter what, and it varies. I would highly suggest that you tune in for that conversation, because it's going to be very much a part, no matter what, whether you're doing accelerated or formals. That's going to be how we're getting records and how those records are being interpreted. So tune into that. Nicole,
Yeah.
Ben, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for having us today. It was absolutely fantastic to talk to you again. We look forward to the next session. Thank you also for hanging in over the time as well. That means a lot to us.
Perfect.
Okay, with that, have a
Bye.
great day, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Take care, everyone.
See you, everyone.
Bye.
See ya.